what role does aesthetics play in innovation? Again, we heard this morning about the role that money or venture capital plays in innovation. Now I'm really interested in finding out what role aesthetics plays in innovation. More importantly, what role does aesthetic innovation have for us in society, if it has a role? And how can it change the way we think and live? I might begin actually with John, to my immediate right, who also has brought some slides to assist in his presentation.
Thank you. Well, first of all, it's an honor to be here. I haven't told Bruce this before, but I actually went to design because of some of your work. So just to be here on the same stage with you is such an exciting thing. Secondly, I'm so excited about this summit because 3 years ago, I bought the URL creativeleadership.com. I thought it'd be an important thing. I thought somehow artists and designers would make an impact in this space. So I feel this is kind of happening, but kind of orthogonally. The third thing is the comment by Louise, who said, do we have to be blind to start feeling more? And this is an important comment apropos to myself because I came from MIT and defected, really. Changed my life. Just to give you some background. So if you look at the green line, that was the economy. And the yellow line is what's supposed to be recovery. And everyone says that recovery will come from science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The previous panel spoke about how innovation would come from these places. It's a common sort of thought. And what I believe instead is that by having been blind from technology for 3 years, living in an art school, there is very little technology. I've been able to see how, well, maybe we have to think of innovation differently. Maybe we have to turn STEM-type thinking into STEAM-type thinking. And this is something that comes from a few ideas I got from well, this is about connecting people. So I was connecting like 2 years ago, and I spoke to a nursing professor who had the missing piece. We were talking about creativity. And she said, oh, I know about creativity. It's very easy, really. And so, well, tell me, what is creativity? What is imagination? And so she laid out this very simple triangle, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's her hierarchy of imagination. At the very bottom, you have a reflex. Something happens, you respond to it. Not much creativity to it. Above that, you have problem solving. It starts to get interesting. You miss the bus. Take a bicycle instead. Walk some way. Make a way around it. The third level, you get creativity. She said it was like taking two ideas and rubbing them together, making a new solution. And at the very top, she said to me, John, the most important thing is imagination. Imagination is the thing that we're all looking for, that thing at the very top of the pyramid. However, in real life, we deal with these two layers all the time, in leading, in doing things, and that's difficult because we also want to be at the very top as well. And what does that mean in the space of innovation today? Innovation today in the STEM areas, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, they're looking for ways to break through, find new discovery. This is a photo from Time Magazine's 100 Innovators. This is Dr. Ho. He's an AIDS researcher. And if you noticed, he has in his hands a model. This is using PowerPoint over Apple or something. A model of clay to look at cells, which is very interesting. Not a ball and stick model. He's trying to go off-road to find new representations. And so we had a workshop funded by the National Science Foundation to look at this question of how to bring art and science together closer. And what was interesting is that at this symposium, we began to see how these intersections naturally can create new information, new innovation. And so in essence, I think that we know that art can lead science to beauty and also discovery, but also the reverse is also possible as well. Science can lead art to it as well. So in closing, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, how do we add art to the equation is the question, and how do we turn STEM into STEAM is what we're after right now.
Thank you. I might turn to Mickey now to respond to the panel question.
You know, actually, I want to bounce off a little bit about what you just talked about, the STEM, STEAM discussion. I think if we look over the last 100 years of what we've done as a society, 100, 150 years, we've kind of matured the industrial process. We've we've flattened the world, we've gotten to the point where we can make anything and we can make it right, which is actually kind of amazing in itself. I mean, I think if you think about it, there are a lot of problems in the world, but I met a guy who was 16 years old, a kid, who worked with a manufacturer. He was a designer. He worked with a manufacturer in China and ended up making a backpack that he was able to sell on eBay when he was 16. And it had the same quality manufacturing as REI, as major sports companies, but it was done by a 16-year-old. And he could make it, and he sold it, and he turned it into a real business. I just visited Tech Shop in San Francisco. It's this kind of maker lab. And I heard about a woman there who knits. And she saw this knitting guide that lets you see the different sizes of knitting needles. And it was very expensive, and she decided to make it herself. So she took 2 classes for 2 hours on how to control a computer cutting machine to cut and laser cut wood. And she started making her own. She designed her own thing, and she made it. And then she started selling it on eBay and on another site called Etsy. And now she has something like a $2 or $3 million business, and she was able to hire her husband and do things. There's a guy in London who's manufacturing buildings by printing them. He basically sends the file to the printer, and it slowly starts rising up, and it builds the building out of sandstone. The guys over at MIT making E. coli, it's a gut bacteria that actually smells like mint when it's growing, and it smells like vanilla when it's actually harvested. So the students did this. So they actually designed a new kind of an organism so they could go out and play Frisbee, so that they wouldn't have to figure out when it ended. They could just walk in, it smells like vanilla, oh, it's done. So you think about this, the last 100 years, pretty amazing. We've gotten to this point where we can make anything, and we can make it right. And I think what we're talking about here, the STEAM conversation, and art and aesthetics, and how that intersects with this really complicated, technologically advanced world where we can make anything and we can make it right, is really to flip the question and start saying, okay, if we can make anything and make it right, what's the right thing to make? And that is not answered by just mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, computer science. It's not answered by science. It's sometimes answered by creativity. It's certainly answered by design. Design is a literacy in itself. It's different, actually, than teaching fine art. It's its own literacy in its own way. And just as 100 years ago, we agreed to teach basic math and reading and writing, we said, this would be good. Let's not hire a consultant to do math for us. It used to be that if you needed to do something complicated with math, you hired somebody and they developed a log table. They were called computers. That was the career. But we agreed math is so applicable that at the age of 5, we should learn it. I think we're getting to the point where design is so applicable that we should be teaching it at the age of 5. And think about it. Now, everyone does a little math. Well, everyone probably will do a little design because we're reaching this point where we can make anything. What's the right thing to make? And I think that's the really interesting place there. And should it be a fundamental literacy that is different, it's taught a little differently than art? And I'd like to make a distinction between art and design and maybe be a little controversial. I think fine art, and my wife is a fine artist. She's a ceramic sculptor. Fine art is about, in some ways, looking at the world and taking your own agenda, looking at the way you see the world and expressing yourself, reacting to the world. And if you do it really well, you develop something that's sort of international, global, universal. You did something that was your own reaction, your own creative push, but you ended up coming up with something that was universal, that everyone sees and goes, oh my gosh, that really gives me a view into the human condition. Design is a little different. I think they're both on the spectrum, but they're different aspects. Design is about taking someone else's agenda. It's not my own agenda. It's about taking someone else's agenda, and they've got a problem, a really hard problem, and they can't solve it by themselves. They're broken. They've got the problem, but they don't necessarily have all the parts to make a solution. And I'm a designer, and I'm broken too. I don't have all the parts to have a solution because I don't have the challenge. So I have to take their challenge, and I have to apply my skills from a design standpoint. They might be aesthetic, they might be about form or function, it might just be about how groups work together, and how to suspend disbelief to actually come up with better ideas. Well, suspending disbelief by itself sounds kind of weird for science, but it's actually really important for design. It's sort of turning off fact checkers. So I need to take someone else's agenda, and that's design, and I need to do something that I couldn't do by myself, and they couldn't do by themselves. But together, we could do something better. And so I think the best designers are actually wildly artistic, and they use that kind of unbridled fine art side of things. And the best artists are wildly design-oriented, and they shuffle back over there, and they do things that really have a system to it. If you look at Frank Stella's paintings, if you look at a lot of people in the world who have been amazing artists, there's almost an architecture to it. There's a system, a design element to it. And so that's the place I'd like us to talk about, is refining our concept of design and thinking about it as a pursuit in itself, different than science or creativity as such or art, but its own thing. And should we think about it as a basic literacy? Should 5-year-olds be doing design?
I'm interested in that concept of design as a fundamental literacy. I think, one could say that drawing was a literacy which to some extent we've lost. Once a rounded education included, lessons in how to draw. So I'm curious about what the idea of design as a literacy would constitute. John mentioned the role of imagination as being part or central in the process of design. And it's very interesting. I was doing some reading recently around cognitive learning in children. And one of the key components of that was that young children should not be kept occupied constantly. That is, sent to classes. They should be allowed to play on their own, to develop their own imagination. So I wonder if there's something there to be learned for us, the idea of play as being at the core of imagination, and how play, even play on one's own, would be a basis for some kind of literacy.
I think I want to talk about the drawing one, and someone else maybe can pick up on the play one for a second. But when we teach drawing as a kid, we look for that sort of native talent. Wow, they're a good drawer, and they can draw these beautiful things. You look at Pablo Picasso's drawings when he was like 4 or something, and they're just amazing. And what we do is we sort of cull out all the other people who aren't good drawers right away, and we stop even paying attention to them. And then later in life, I meet them, and they're CEOs of businesses, and they're like senior executives, and they're amazing leaders, they're amazing just people doing really interesting things, teachers. And I say, hey, here's a marker, draw really quick. Draw me a picture of what you're talking about. And they're like, oh, I'm not really a good drawer. And it's almost like we beat this out of children. We beat it out of them. And in a sense, one of the things we started doing is experiments with inner city high school kids and teaching them to draw to communicate, not to draw for pretty. So when I give them a marker, I say, draw a tangible thing. They start drawing it. Okay, draw an intangible. Draw a picture of collaboration. Well, they start doing it too, and they start doing things like using blobs and boxes as nouns and arrows as verbs. And it turns out it's kind of a lingua franca. If you've got an engineer in a room, if you've got a human scientist, a cognitive psychologist, if you've got a marketing guy, they all might speak a different language, but you give them a marker and you say, draw what you mean. And pretty soon they draw blobs and arrows, and you start to see things, and pretty soon you can talk to each other. And so I actually think drawing is the lingua franca between disciplines. I think it's teaching people to draw and celebrating really kind of crappy looking drawings, but if they communicate something, if they help you kind of prototype your thought on paper, I think that's a big deal. And I think we should get back to teaching it, but teaching it, I think, and understanding the cognitive implications as well.
Might be a good opportunity to bring Richard into the discussion here as a practicing artist. What are your thoughts on the role of drawing as a kind of a language? And I guess more broadly, the idea of art as a kind of as something that is fundamental to cognitive development.
This is kinds of questions where we have at least 3 topics that need definitions so badly, and we throw them all together and say, respond to that. And it's I think as this panel was presented, the first of my awareness, it was really focused on design, and certainly we have an unbelievable representation of design aficionados, and as such, I intended to come here and just learn and listen, and I chose this chair so I can be in awe of all these people. But then I see it's actually listed as art and design. which title can we, I mean, we have an audience here who has certain expectations, and if any of those expectations involve art, I feel empowered. 'Cause
Yeah, I think you're empowered.
thank you.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, we could even begin with a commonality, the role of intuition, say, in the creative process for designers and artists. That might be something that draws those two topic areas together.
Well, for starters, I'm completely against imagination.
Okay, all right. What about intuition? Do you feel intuition?
And I just want to say this thing, because this is the second year I've been invited to this, and it's always odd because I, as a teenager, was brought here for, there was a company named the Cooter Educational Preference Testing Association. And when your parents really didn't know, couldn't understand you, and thought you didn't know, you couldn't understand yourself, they would take you to these places and you take these tests. In all the visual tests, I scored, like nobody had ever seen before. But when those tests were given, because I was already so visually oriented, I could operate from behind the questioner, as it was. I knew what they wanted, and I could produce what they wanted. And I knew my interests had anything to do what these people were asking. But I did it because I thought that's, my parents paid a lot of money, so I should do this. I think one thing that's very, very important, I mean, we have this word innovation. And, that's just an unbelievably great thing, we all feel, identified and so on. And it's also a word where, as Americans, we are very invested in this notion we're the same. Somehow or another, we have a sameness and we can participate in a participatory democracy. But then we throw in something like art and design. They couldn't be more opposite. And if you're born naturally like that cloud in the sky, as an artist, you're an artist. And if you're born that way as a designer, you're a designer. And because one of the rules is that happiness comes to us when we are what we are, we better be who we are to be happy. So as far as innovation is concerned, it's very, very important to the artist that there's no goal in sight. I have no idea. I mean, the abstract expressionists had a great phrase that was picked up and used called non-directionality. It means, as an artist, you start with your feet together and you take that first step and you have no idea where you're going. That's really hard. And as such, I've often said, and that's one of the reasons I admire designers so much, because, and I know this is a very old-fashioned idea, but because I learned it that long ago, that a designer, your great designer, is somebody who's supposed to know everything about everything. And then you can be a great designer. But an artist, you are supposed to know nothing about anything.
It's funny, you said it was important for an artist to have no goal in sight, which is an interesting concept. Let's come back to that later. That, in my mind, is a version of imagination, but we can nut that out a little later. Let me turn to Bruce, just return to that question of design as a fundamental literacy, specifically in relation to massive change network. And its role as an educational business. And
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think the insight and the what you've articulated is really important. I mean, what we're we did a project several years ago called Massive Change, and it was really looking at the capacity of design to shape the world, to shape the experience that we have. If you think about your own experience, you have, think about the number of times you can close your eyes and open them in a place where you see only natural things. You realize it's almost zero, that in fact, almost your entire experience is actually within a designed envelope. But we're a little bit embarrassed about the power that we have. We're suspect of it, and we haven't really developed a rich articulation of those possibilities, and a really thorough conversation around the implications. And part of that is that if you think about design in education, the first part of our education, we teach children to take their brains apart. And the role of design is to put your brain back together. We've developed an educational system that is about isolation and silo. It's about the mathematics here and the literature here and the art over there, and each of these things separately. And I'm doing a project with my youngest daughter and her class, and they told me that the art period is 38 minutes long. And I thought, well, no wonder we have a problem. I mean, who does art in 38 minutes? I mean, how could you even conceive of that? Right? So I think that if you think about what design is as a methodology, is the place where we bring those things back together. We bring art and science, these two isolated cultures, back into play to create solutions around objectives. And I love the idea that art has no goal in sight. Design is all goal. I mean, we are all about what's the objective. Now, we define that objectives ourselves often. I mean, more and more what we're doing is actually trying to understand what are the best objectives, and can we design a methodology of designing objectives. And I think one of the most interesting areas, if you think about when you look at design education, we teach kids to not to do it as a child, and then we try to teach them to do it in college. So we teach them to take it apart, take their brain apart in grade school, and then try to put it back together in college. We ought to be teaching a methodology of design from the very beginning that is a synthetic, holistic, ecological intelligence in the world. And the definition in this panel was about a way of being in the world. That's what a way of being in the world is as a design approach, to say we need to be in the world much more intelligently than we have in the past. When we were 1.5 billion people, we could behave like frat boys. It didn't make a difference. But at 7 billion people, going to 10 billion, what we do adds up. So our way of being in the world has to be reinvented, and we have very little framework for educating people around that methodology. And I think there's a massive opportunity, and that's why we're building the Massive Change Network. It's really the model that we've developed in higher education is reaching less than 1% of the world. I mean, when I discovered this, I just about fell off my chair, that we think everyone's going to university, going to college. Actually, less than 1% of the world has access to what we take for granted as higher education. We've built the revolution of possibility that we're now experiencing by educating less than 1% beyond high school. And we've abandoned the 99%. And so what we're trying to understand is how can we bring, completely, as was mentioned in the earlier panel, rethink the way that we deliver education. I mean, our model is so outmoded that we have an opportunity to reach those to reach that 99% with these new possibilities and capacities. And that's what we're doing.
I think this is really, you mentioned also going to 7 billion people, and we could mess around a bit. We could be frat boys if it was just a few of us, But if you put in the context of what I said earlier, anyone can make anything. You have to take that into account, right? If high schoolers can redesign human organisms, like actual organisms, if there are solar-powered 3D printers that you can use in the desert to print buildings, if anyone can do that, it's kind of like handing, atomic energy to a 6-year-old and saying, hey, go for it, right? And so we have this weird moment that I don't think people are paying attention to. The chief scientist of Amazon said that we generated more information in 2009 than from 2008 to the dawn of mankind. So in 1 year, last year, we made more information. So information, the ability to make things, it's not a digital divide. Frankly, the digital divide is going to disappear in some respects. You'll be digging spare iPads out of your couch in a few years because they'll be given away with Cracker Jack boxes or with, with your cereal. That kind of computing, something that 10 years ago only a very few people had access to, is the kind of thing that will cost pennies. What does that mean? Because our children are going to live in that space. And if we don't invest in teaching design, we're just sort of handing out these incredible weapons, these kind of amazing, weapons of creation and destruction, and we're not necessarily teaching anybody how to use them.
Let's come back to John on that. Somebody's actively engaged in education, and the question I had firstly was, is there a methodology of designing objectives that Bruce referred to, and also what would a sort of a design literacy program, let's say for pre-university students, look like?
Well, that's something that a lot of my colleagues are looking at, so I was just so excited to hear Mickey articulate it so clearly. But I'm just sort of thinking about your question from the past session, where, sorry, what is your name? Mark. Mark was saying how innovation is about change, but institutions are about keeping something the same. So how do you combat that? And when I listen to Richard's comment about how artists should have no goal in sight, it's a romantic notion. It's a good notion. It keeps art and design separate, and I'm okay with that. I'm the president of a school where when I walk around sometimes, let me give you an example. A glass artist came up to me. Student said to me, John, I hate that you talk about green things, green recyclable things, green energy. I want to use my heat to make my glass happen. So don't talk about that. And I was like, I totally get that. That's okay. Not for everyone. It isn't about the little interaction. It's about what can institutions do. You have an institution as well. My institution stands for something. So I've been looking for how do you position what it stands for without changing it. And it goes to the point that Mickey wrote about play, drawing and play. Play. People think that art and design is something playful. Let's get out the crayons. Let's get out the paint. Let's do useless creative stuff. This is the model. Why is this model existing? 2 reasons, I believe, that I found in the last 24 hours. Yesterday, I was in Washington talking at the Etsy conference. Etsy is an online selling site for crafts. And the one thing that stuck the most to them was this question about, I don't want to be a starving artist. Is that okay? And I said, yes, it is okay. So the president of RISD says, it's okay to not be a starving artist. You don't have to be a starving artist because so many artists and designers are gainfully doing things in the economy. The second thing is this idea of it's easy, art and design school. Let me give you an example. I have 5 universities in my neighborhood in Providence, Rhode Island. A police person came up to me from the Providence police, said, your kids never get in trouble. They're always in studio. We never see them. They're not messing around. So what do we take away from that? Art is an arduous practice. It is a passionate practice. It is not for pansies. And I think that those kind of stereotypes have to be broken for art and design to have a bigger impact.